The Department of Public Service and Administration, the DPSA, also releasing a statement to say it's noted the notice served to the National Economic Development and Labour Council, NEDLEC, by the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, and the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, to embark on a socio-economic protest action in all sectors of the economy, including the public service. The DPSA cautioned that while the protest action is protected by the Labour Relations Act, those employees who fall within the essential services are prohibited from participating in the process. Now, to look at this and other impacts of the so-called national shutdown, we're joined by political economist Professor Sam Koma from the Northwest University. Prof, thank you so much for making the time. You probably had an opportunity to scan the situation this morning just in terms of the responsiveness of workers to this call to protest. What are your thoughts, your initial thoughts?
Yes, this is Workers' Day. It is a day that is occasioned by Section 77 strike, which is in accordance with the Labour Relations Act, which provides the right for workers through their labour federations to promote and defend socio-economic rights. So it is a legitimate strike. They've followed all the procedural requirements to embark on this specific strike, which is being labelled or dubbed national shutdown. So they're raising pertinent issues that have already been informed by a number of protests that have taken place. For example, the Soweto electricity crisis, the Tembisa electricity crisis, and the common issue is around the rising cost of living, which is not in keeping with the average household income of an urban dweller typically, because the data that we have is that an average urban dweller spends around 4,000 rands on basic necessities, namely food, fuel or transport, and also other issues related to electricity, because obviously they have to pay electricity. So these are some of the protests that have been building up to this specific day, which is the national shutdown today. So I'm saying there is a commonality, there is interrelationship between what ordinary South Africans raise through a protest, including today's shutdown, which is basically a workers' shutdown through the Labour Federation.
Interesting thoughts there, Prof, and we'll continue to have this conversation. But before we took those crossings to our colleagues, we were having a conversation in the studio with Professor Sam Koma, who's a political economist. Prof, these are valid issues that the unions are raising. We can all feel the brunt. But is this shutdown the right way to go about it? I just want to read you a tweet that one of our viewers sent through this morning, Johanna, I think, Grobler, saying the economy is in a state of collapse. Calling for a shutdown is immature, undemocratic, and nothing else. Of course, it's not undemocratic. Nothing else than socialism. No work, no pay should be the rule. Productivity should be a priority. Union bosses get proper salaries, drive decent vehicles while the workers suffer. Of course, some of those arguments there are not valid. It is constitutional to strike, but is it the right way to go about it, just to get the attention of government?
Yes, in fact, it's a mechanism provided for already in our law. It allows workers through labour federations to put pressure on government leaders, economic leaders.
But what about that argument that the economy is under pressure? We've just come out of a lockdown economy and we are seeing the results of that.
Yes, our economy is on its knees. We all agree on that. But also workers, the sense I'm getting is that we are not going to sit on our laurels to wait for government, business leaders and other key role players to come on board in terms of addressing these pressing socio-economic issues, the rising inequality levels, the rising poverty levels, and also the rising unemployment levels. You have been making pronouncements. You have the national minimum wage. You agreed on that through NEDLEC, but some employers are reluctant to enforce this national minimum wage of around 3,000 rands in some of the key sectors. So this is one way. Unfortunately, given the economic dire situation we have in our country, that workers are using to put pressure on these key stakeholders to act upon some of their pronouncements to fast-track the implementation of the economic recovery measures and interventions that collectively they've agreed upon through the relevant platforms, NETLAC. We have the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, which was introduced by government last year. Where are we in terms of progress around some of the proposals that are packaged in that plan? So basically, that's how workers will use this kind of mechanism. Legitimately so, as I said, it's within the confines of the law.
That statement by the Department of Public Service and Administration barring essential workers from taking part in this process, do you get a sense that they're not able to read the room?
Yes, in fact, we know that today medical professionals, healthcare professionals, the police officials, on my way here I saw traffic officials are at work, so they fall under essential service. So you'll have, for example, in the case of teachers, some will not go today to work, others will go, but they are not falling within the category of essential workers. But because this is about solidarity. But why would
the department want to state the obvious?
Well, it's one way of intimidating, okay, and not to have a major effect on key services that are provided by the government, education, health, and other key services.
You were speaking earlier about some data that has come through yesterday, Stats SA saying that jobs numbers are improving, a slight decrease in unemployment, now at 33.9%. What sort of new data do you have just in terms of South Africans who are buckling under pressure, just in terms of affordability? How are they making do? What means do they have at their disposal to survive under these conditions?
Yes, interesting question. Remember, we have the 350 distress grant, which today the labor federations are calling for implementation of the universal basic income grant that will cater for. Remember, we've got 8 million plus unemployed individuals in this country. In the argument, as one of the proponents, we are saying this is one way of cushioning the effects of this rising income inequalities in the country. It will also provide some kind of a measure that allows them to be able to uplift their standard of living given the rising food prices, the fuel prices, and other basic necessities. So that is one call that they are making to cater for this economically marginalized section or sector of the population.
The universal basic income grant that you're talking about was a huge conversation during the time of former President Thabo Mbeki. Where did that conversation go by the wayside, and is it even a conversation in government at the moment?
Yes, I remember there were those who were saying affordability. Of course, you always have contestation around this particular issue. Some raising the issue of is it the right way to address issues of poverty? Are we not creating a dependency syndrome in the country? But South Africa, we are a developing country. Unfortunately, we have the highest inequality level between the rich and the poor. So you'll always have to think through what could be the possible short-term, medium-term, long-term measures that we can introduce to try to address this kind of a situation. So that is one proposal. There are also others who are also saying, what about universal health insurance that will cater for everyone, irrespective of economic status or income status. Yeah. So the ball is in the court of government to drive these measures, to drive these interventions, because they've also pronounced that we intend to create a new economy.
So conversations around the national health insurance have always brought up the conversation of massive corruption, which is partly the South African conversation about how we got to be where we at now. Just in terms of the spectre of corruption in the country. Yesterday, we had the Hawks announcing that they're looking at about 100 priority cases in the country to the tune of about more than 1 trillion. Are you getting a sense that government is doing something about corruption? Is it getting better? Is it worsening?
Yeah, in fact, I was also terrified when I saw the figure, 1.5 trillion, that the rent value of the amount of corruption that the Hawks they are currently dealing with. But we also have the SIU and the Special Tribunal. I'm comforted that through the work of the SIU and the Special Tribunal, at this stage, they were able to recover about 8 billion rand. That was informed by issues of corruption, fraud, largely arising from the PPE procurement corruption. So I think there are some interventions that are showing signs of progress and also recovery from our criminal justice institutions and law enforcement agencies, namely in this instance, the Hawks, the SIU, and also the Special Tribunal. But it shows that more work needs to be done to tighten the leakages that we have in the system and also to ensure that there is proper, decisive consequence management against any individual who commits wrongdoing across the board, public and private sector.
You've been saying through the conversation that the strike action and the protest action is within the law and that you support it, but just in terms of the possible impacts of this action today on the economy? Of course,
it will have unintended consequences. It will affect small businesses.
Unintended?
Consequences, because, I mean, they are raising legitimate issues. But unintended consequence could be possible job loss, because some of these businesses will be affected today.
Are they not aware of these consequences as they enter into the action and taking the risk?
No, as I said, unfortunately, workers at some point will have to exercise their constitutional right. They go through these procedural requirements to comply with any law that deals with issues of protest, strike, and also picket. They followed that process. Hence, NETLEC gave them the green light to say you can continue to embark on the strike, because it's about raising those issues. Very peaceful, I think, at this stage, relatively. Of course, we'll monitor the situation until late in the afternoon today, because that's part of the timeline that they've been given. But I think this is one way of workers finding a way to demonstrate, to raise pertinent issues that require the attention of decision makers. And they're saying that. They're saying, you have shown sense of agency, speed during COVID days. We saw the interventions that we introduced. Can you build on that momentum in terms of fast-tracking implementation of the very same measures that are agreed upon by the different social partners at NETLEC and also other platforms?
What are the possible positive responses that can come out of government?
Yeah, we hope government today will take these issues serious. One, the issue of implementation of the Universal Basic Income Grant, thus phasing out the 350 distress grant and introduce that. Of course, the amount is pegged around 1,500. We believe it will go a long way to cater for this economic situation for obviously people who are poor, both rural and urban dwellers, act against corruption and malfeasance, and load shedding, because it continues to affect all the economic sectors. So we believe this could be some of the positive developments coming out of this particular national shutdown.
How should business be engaging with this development?
Of course, it's through dialogue and also through enforcing some of these collective bargaining agreements, some of these legislated provisions. I refer to the national minimum wage. It's legislated. Most employers are still reluctant to implement or enforce that particular national wage, minimum wage. So we believe that private sector, business, employers today, going forward, they will engage with labor and government to deal with some of these issues that are agreed upon as social partners.
And there's also that other national conversation that's been taking place just in terms of the ratio between South African, the workforce, as opposed to foreign nationals who work in South Africa. How does this conversation weave its way into the protest today?
Yeah, of course it does, because today's protest is also about saying fast track the creation of employment opportunities for majority of unemployed South Africans. You have pronounced during COVID, early stages of COVID, that you intend to create a new economy after realizing that the bulk of the workers who were benefiting from the UIF TES scheme largely were foreign workers. So it was a wake-up call to government to say we seem to be dealing with a very massive problem here in terms of the employment situation. Hence, they then initiated other measures that are aimed at, of course, curbing the number of foreign workers who can be employed in the country, and also to open up space for South African individuals to also get an opportunity to be employed in some of the key sectors.
We're having a conversation with Professor Sam Koma, just looking at the possible impacts of that shutdown today. You're also welcome to call us as a viewer, 011-714-6841 or 6842.